Welcome once again, folks, to another session of Let's Chat with me, Meor Addelan. Have you ever thought about leaving the country and trying to earn your living in another country, in a foreign country, in a faraway land? That's why for today's topic, we actually have the topic of is the grass really greener on the other side? We have a very special guest with me tonight who's going to be talking about his experience of being a Malaysian, but also learning his trade and earning his bucks abroad in another country. And with that, folks, I have the pleasure to introduce you my friend Rishen Shekhar. Hey Rish, how are you, man?
How are you, Meor? Lovely to see you. Thanks for having me, man.
Can you just share with our viewers your life experience? How did you manage to get yourself in Australia and since 2002 and didn't want to come back? Am I saying that correctly?
No, I think the part of that is correct. Yeah. I mean, I'm the standard story. I came to Australia in 2002 as an international student. I met a girl, and I never wanted to leave ever since then. Right. So, fast forward 18 years, I've almost spent half my life in Australia at the moment. I sort of graduated in 2004. I applied for a skilled and a graduate visa. I spent 11 years in Brisbane working. And then in the last 5 years, I relocated my family to Adelaide for my current role that I'm working with at the University of South Australia in Adelaide. So it's one of those traditional stories, I suppose.
Didn't it cross your mind at any time when you were still early when you were in Australia that, well, maybe I would just want to bring my wife back to Malaysia, like doing something in Malaysia rather than in Australia?
Look, I think at that time, young love, you're sort of excited about being in Australia. So initially, before I was in that relationship, my goal getting on the plane and coming to Brisbane or coming to Australia was really get my degree and head home, right? The idea of staying wasn't even there. It was only after that I thought about staying on and working. But I suppose for me at that time, the thoughts didn't come about going back to Malaysia with my girlfriend at the time. And I didn't end up marrying her. I ended up marrying my beautiful wife and meeting her a couple of years later. But yeah, it's just one of those things.
Didn't you really want to think that, okay, perhaps this is the time that I should actually go back to Malaysia? Because yeah, at that time, when you talk about the early 2000s, there were, our country were definitely looking for more professionals coming down and contributing to the country. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, with that thought in mind, I suppose the initial thought process was really to get some exposure overseas first, see, if I could gather some of the Australian work experience with the potential view of then taking those skills back home to Malaysia and then being able to pick up some sort of a better looking job. That was the initial thought process when I first graduated. And then after that, life just happened, right? And I never had the opportunity then to go back. So it was one of those things where hindsight's a wonderful thing.
But it's so cool, isn't it? Because in Australia, you're earning Australian dollars. You're getting, it may be the same par as what a fresh grad in KL will get. But granted, there's no denying the fact that the cost of living in Brisbane, for instance, as far as I know, is not that it's not that bad in comparison to KL, for instance, because in KL, you could earn 3,000 ringgit, 4,000 ringgit when you're a fresh grad before, but your cost of living could be much higher. Is it not the same case of in comparison to what you were experiencing back then?
No, I think that's certainly one of the differences about living in Australia anyway. Is that you don't need to be an investment banker to be living a comfortable lifestyle in Australia, right? Because the wage structures, the opportunities, the minimum wage, the sort of salary scales are very much that, you could still be working in a supermarket, for example, but still be able to afford to, purchase your own car, to rent at least your own home and live independently, right? So I think that is certainly the reality, is that the cost of living is relative and much more affordable than perhaps the salary earnings back home in Malaysia.
That's definitely the dream of a lot of Malaysians going out abroad. Is that really true?
I think there's some truth to that, but I look at, for example, I watch on my buddies back home on social media, and they've got domestic helpers that clean for them, iron for them, cook for them, babysit their kids for them. I mean, is it really a better life? I don't know, because I'm the one dreading to wake up on a Sunday morning and have to clean toilets with my boys at home and prepare dinner for the week and iron 2 lots of clothing with my wife. So I think it is all relative, and it's important to identify what is important to you. And it's not just necessarily about the dollars and the earning capacity, but there's so much more to it.
What is hindering you from actually coming back to Malaysia? Is Australia really treating us Malaysians better there?
Life happens, you have kids, you have family, you build your networks, you build your home. And so those things then, when you're younger in life and younger in your career, the opportunity to just uproot and move is reasonably very easy, right? But I've got 2 sisters. One sister now lives in Brisbane, and another sister lives in Melbourne. And my dad passed away 15 years ago, so it's only mum that's left in TTDI at the moment. And we are admittedly looking at options to bring my mum here, because that's when she's going to spend the most amount of time with her grandkids, right? So I just don't think it's about that we haven't considered it, or that it's so much better here. But it's certainly that we have our roots and we have our families and we have our lives, and it's good. But I would certainly never knock the opportunity.
Should Malaysia is on the table, or should I say that an offer comes on the table for you to have a similar lifestyle in comparison for what you have in Australia, would you come back?
Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, if it's all about the right role, the right job, right? And for me, it's also about the right organization. So it's the right job, it's the right organization. I've got to believe in what I do. It's the right boss, which is exceptionally important for me, because coming back to the previous question, things that are important to me is not necessarily just the financial and the income side of things, but also the work-life balance, which is exceptionally important for my family and I, right? I mean, we grew up in the 90s in Malaysia. And for most of us, my parents were both government servants. They worked for the Malaysian government. They worked very, very hard. But it also meant that they worked 6.5 days a week, right? Now, back then, when I was a teenager, when I was a kid, I played a tremendous amount of sport. It may not look like that now, but I did play a lot of sport back in the day. And because my parents worked, they didn't have the opportunities to come and watch and see and support, not because they didn't want to, they just simply couldn't. There was not the opportunity for them to do that. Now having boys at 8 and 14 years old, I'm at every sports day, I'm at every training, I'm at every taekwondo grading, and that's important to me. So if I know that there is an opportunity for a job back home and that there are some of these opportunities coming up, that would factor into my decision, right? So that's the sort of conversation I'd want to know and want to have before I took a role, that I had that flexibility, because that's where I really excel.
From what you have seen, 18 years is such a long time, but how has the influx been, Malaysians coming down to Australia in general to seek a career opportunity over there rather than finding a job in Malaysia?
I mean, look, I don't think that, I don't have the figures on me, Meor, but I'd say that there's a significant amount of Malaysians moving here, right? I mean, just looking at, my family and my immediate connections, the amount of people that have moved over the last couple of years, both for your sort of professional, so your doctors, your engineers, the vet, the dentist, those sort of people, but also the sort of vocational skilled people, right? The chefs, the people that have come to work in the mines, the diesel mechanics. We've had a range of those. I think so. They are certainly moving, and traditionally, the Malaysian communities have always been in Melbourne, in Perth, in Sydney. But there's a very strong Malaysian community here in Adelaide as well, which was a result of the old, the Colombo plan many years ago, when the Australian federal government funded people from the Asia Pacific to come and undertake their studies in Australia. So there's Malaysian communities everywhere. I live in a neighborhood where it's very easy for me to find gula melaka, to find sago, to find fresh durians. It's not really a huge issue that way. So there is a substantial Malaysian community here and growing.
In your own opinion, in your own understanding of what really you want to wish for, what could Malaysia actually do? Maybe like, the companies that we have in Malaysia, government, private sectors, or whatever it is. What could change in order for us Malaysians at least to keep people like you guys, the great talents, rather than going abroad, sticking into Malaysia? What do you think that these sectors have to upgrade, have to better themselves?
Look, I'm because I actually don't know the environment, in Malaysia at the moment, right? So I feel like it's a dangerous area for me to comment on because I don't know what I don't have, right? From Malaysia back home, but I mean, I've got many of my colleagues that spent a significant amount of time working as expats in Malaysia and absolutely loving it, right? And having a fantastic experience. Those that worked on the LRT train lines before the Commonwealth Games, many who worked in the oil and gas industry, all of which were exceptionally happy with their work environment. Now, what would entice me to move home? It's one of those things that are very personal. It is about the opportunities, and the right opportunity, which is really not something I see that's being able to be controlled by the government or anything like that. I mean, yes, some form of stability back home would be useful. Yeah, I mean, we always worry about political instability to a certain extent of what's happening. That is an issue, but I don't think that's a huge hindrance. I mean, if you look, it's got all of the buttons right. It's got the infrastructure, it's got the education system, it's got the natural resources, it's got the brain power. So if you look at the recipe, there's a lot that Malaysia has to offer, right? So it's not that there's anything else that needs to be added, maybe a little bit of stability, but it's about the right opportunity at the right time, I think.
Should someone comes up to you right now and ask you, bro, I want to go and live abroad, I want to learn my trades abroad, I want to live abroad, I want to be like you, what would you say to them?
I think the number one advice I would give to that person is make sure you do it for the right reasons, right? One common theme that I've got over the years when I've listened to people who sort of migrated across is they say that they're doing it for their kids. They say they're doing it for their kids' futures. They're doing it for their kids' education. So they end up just applying for migration and they move across. And then they end up coming here and they absolutely hate it. And they have a horrible experience. And then what happens is they either end up, they get to a stage where their kids finish school, finish university, and then the parents move away and go back home to Malaysia because that's home for them. I just think you've got to do it for the right reasons. So before you go to these particular cities where you're looking at, talk to people, find out about the community, find out about your support networks, find out about your cultural connections, because all that's so important. So just, I worry that if you do it for the wrong reasons, because the reality, and one thing that I want to stress out there is, if you are coming as a direct migrant, right, most often than not, you're going to have to take 2 steps back in your career to a certain extent in order to move 1 step forward, right? Because you've got to establish credibility, you've got to build networks, you've got to prove yourself, right? And I've seen that, with so many of my family where, they were quite senior doctors in Malaysia, but when they come here, they do have to take that step back. And you've got to be really mentally prepared that is okay here, because nobody worries about your level or your status or what your experience is. You've got to prove as you go along. So those would be the 2 bits of it. So you've got to be mentally prepared for this journey before you come on it.
Thank you so much for coming onto the show. Really insightful. It really paints us a clear picture on how life is actually, even though when you're not in Malaysia, when you're learning, when you're earning your trade somewhere else. But at the end of the day, I do believe that we are all Malaysians through and through, and nothing beats home. I mean, that's Malaysia is Malaysia for sure. Thanks so much, Rishen, for coming onto the show. Have a good one, man. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bill.
All right, guys, that was Rishen Shekhar talking to us about, is the grass really greener? It's what you make of it, actually. I mean, sometimes it is so cool, sometimes it is so great, but how you present yourself, how you bring yourself forward, as what Rishen has mentioned, is all about your pure intentions, what they are, and fully living through it. Interesting. Thank you so much, folks, for watching this episode. Hope to see you guys again on the next one. Take care now. Bye-bye.